3 or 4 years is what I always say to people about the problem in you have as a political leader, that you begin at your least capable and most popular, and you end at your least popular and most capable. Frankly, actually, towards the end, in a way, by then I just decided I was going to do what I thought was right. So I would say media managing, probably I did more in my first bit than my last bit. But having said that, I would describe, having regard to the media was a major factor, but maybe it's always going to be that. That's why I would be, if you were looking back in time, I can't believe there's been prime ministers who didn't take that as a major part of what they were doing.
Except that, and it may be that Mr. Jay will come on to this, except that you took the decision that you needed somebody to direct your communications who had a real background in tabloid journalism and took the responsibility very seriously and very effectively. And now we see that political leaders generally appear to have followed the same sort of pattern.
Yes, no, that's an absolutely correct point. I mean, look, what I could see developing, and by the way, this is even more so today, you've got 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week media, you've got stories, the thing that's changed, and I noticed this, by the way, around the world, this is not a specific British problem, is the interaction between social media and conventional media today means that you get what used to be a building wave of opinion, which if you intervened in the right way, it would then ebb again, right? It now reaches tsunami force within hours sometimes, days certainly, and can capsize a government, can literally wash a government away, right? You see this around the world. So, for example, I think when you're analysing these Arab revolutions, which I've, in the work I do now, see quite closely, I would say the social media is an absolutely integral part of what has happened there. So I would say today, this whole issue, absolutely you're right. Today, this whole issue of managing the media is far more difficult and far more important because, this is not a criticism, it's just a fact. The fact is it occurs in a way and with an intensity that in the old days wouldn't have happened. So, this is why I used to say to people, they used to say, well, your cabinet meetings don't last long enough. And I used to always give the example that Roy Jenkins used to give me back in the 60s, where a cabinet meeting on a big decision would go on for 2 days. And at the end of it, they'd have a show of hands around the table. Now, by the time I became Prime Minister, a cabinet meeting went on for 2 days. Forget it. There would have been total crisis mode for the whole of the government. And if I'd said to them, right, we're going to have a show of hands now, who had voted which way and how would have been out within 30 seconds, and you would have, So all I'm saying is the business of politics, part of the problem here, which is why this is the right moment to assess what can be done, is the business of politics has become acutely more difficult, not for the fault of either politicians or media, but because the system within which you operate, the technology that's available, the way it works today is just fundamentally different. And this is a problem, by the way, this is a problem that has arisen here in a particular way, and this is why we have this inquiry. But I can tell you, you could talk to any leader in the democratic world today, and they would say to you this is a major question for them as to how they have the right interaction with the media in a world that is just a light years away from what we grew up with.
Your informal contacts with Mrs. Brooks, or at least what she refers to, did many of those have to do with her personal support for you in the context of what she describes as a deepening hostility between you and Mr. Brown?
I've read that in her evidence. Actually, to be fair to her, she was, pretty cautious, actually, about whatever she said about Gordon Brown, and basically was supportive of him taking over, with me at any rate. No, they were about politics in a pretty general way. As I say, so far as at that point, at any rate, for the Murdoch press, I had my own relationship with Rupert Murdoch, and he was the key decision maker.
What did you feel about some of her campaigns, in particular Sarah's Law? Did that appeal to you or not?
No, I was pretty ambivalent about that, as I think I said to her at the time. I mean, I understood why she thought it was a big problem, but I thought particularly the trouble with any of these campaigns is that if you're not careful, the way they're conducted ends up getting out of hand.
Do you feel this one did?
Yeah.
And what about some of the personal attacks in The Sun against some of your colleagues?
Yeah, well, my attitude to that throughout was always to say, I mean, not merely to her, but to anybody else. I mean, I didn't like it. I don't like it. I think it's, not the right way to conduct politics. But again, to be frank, this was not a matter simply for The Sun. I mean, you could spread that across the media piece.
And did there come a point, as with Mr. Murdoch, I suppose, that you developed a friendship with her?
Yes, for Rebecca Wade, or Rebecca Brooks as she became, again, probably closer once I left office, when again you were free from the constraints and when it wasn't a relationship that, as it were, is about the power relationship.
Did you offer her any messages of support in July of last year?
I'm somebody who doesn't believe in being a fair weather friend, and certainly I said I was very sorry for what had happened to her, and I remain. I mean, obviously, whatever's happened, I don't know anything about the facts of the particular case, but I have been or seen people go through these situations, and I know what it's like.
Look at some specific case studies, I suppose, now. The first one is paragraph 16 of your statement, Mr. Blair, where you deal with the issue of change of policy on media ownership between 1994 and 1997. And I think you agree that there was a change of policy. Had you kept to the original policy, it would have been a problem for the Murdoch press. But then you say there were sound, objective reasons for changing it. Is that a fair summary of your evidence?
Yes, absolutely.
But I can ask you, though, what were then the sound, objective reasons for changing the policy?
Well, they were twofold. First of all, I didn't and don't believe the issue of the ownership is what is important. In other words, I think that, and I thought this particularly as we get later to the 2003 Communications Act, I think prejudices against foreign owners, or saying, well, this particular owner we like or we don't like, I think it's better to deal with these issues on the basis of competition for the concentration of media ownership. And, if you don't change the culture or the rules, then you won't actually improve the situation. And also, as I said to you earlier, I mean, I'd taken the view I was not going to have the Labour Party coming back into power after 18 years with a programme of change for the country and having the centrepiece of the programme being, issues to do with media ownership. I thought that would have been a distraction and wrong.
I think it was Mr. Lance Price who expressed the view that the cross-media ownership policy was quietly dropped within 6 months of the Hayman Island trip, which of course we know was in July 1995. Is that a fair assessment or not?
No, it's not a fair assessment. The fact is I was absolutely clear we weren't going to put this in the Labour Party programme. If you'd done that, you would have started off your time in government concentrating on the media. I don't actually recall at the time many people arguing very fiercely in order to keep it there.
Do you know approximately when this change of policy arose?
I don't. I mean, I can try and find out from the Labour Party policy people at the time.
Mr. Price is right. He may be wrong about cause and effect. We're sort of at the back end of 1995, early 1996. Could that be right?
I don't know. I mean, I have to go and check it. I mean, don't let me, on the other hand, as I say in my statement, had we kept that, it would definitely have been a problem with the Murdoch Media Group in particular, that's for sure. But I didn't think it was the right policy anyway. So, and I think really throughout and also at the beginning part of my time in office, I mean, I was pretty much on the self-regulation side of the market. I came to a different view at a later stage. So in a way, the policy that we pursued then was consistent with the policy we first pursued in government. Now, had you decided to take all of that on, that comes back to my strategic decision, but that's another topic.
Policy in the immediate run-up to the 1997 election. First of all, Mr. Campbell's diaries, page 10 of our bundle, with the entry for the 11th of March 1997. Where Mr. Hall, then the editor of the News of the World, called to say there had been a sea change in Les Hinton's view. There was definitely movement to us, and their big fear was more unions than Europe, but his view was Murdoch was definitely going to back us. Do you remember that sort of message being communicated to you?
I do actually remember Alistair telling me about his conversation with Phil Hall, yeah. Which is not to say that he knew, by the way, Phil, I don't think, but I mean, by then, by the way, this is March 1997, I think.
It is.
Yeah, so by then I think would have been surprised, actually, if they hadn't come up and backed us.
Is the general point being made an accurate one, that their big fear was more unions than Europe?
Yeah, I think probably that was true, actually. I mean, look, they'd been through all this whopping business. So the unions weren't merely a sort of theoretical issue, it was a major practical issue. I mean, he felt that, to some extent, rightly, that if he hadn't been able to overcome that union opposition, he would never have been able to save the Times and operate in the country. So it was obviously going to be a big issue for them. But my position on the unions, let me make it absolutely clear, was because I believed in it. So we introduced a minimum wage, equal rights for part-time workers. We introduced statutory recognition. We were going to introduce individual rights, but I was determined, and this was a matter of conviction, not because Rupert Murdoch or anyone else believed in it, that we were not going to reverse the key principles of the Thatcher legislation. And I did that for reasons because I thought it was right.
Now, there's a later diary entry. This is page 11 of this bundle. We're a few days later, so I haven't got the exact date, although we know the piece in the Sun was on the 17th. The first piece in the Sun was the 17th of March 1997. You remember that one? And the second piece was the 17th of April 1997. At the top of our page 11, Mr. Campbell notes that meanwhile I called Stuart Higgins as agreed, and he said that, clearly having spoken to Murdoch, that if we gave them a piece on Europe saying the kind of things TB had said last time they met, they'd put it on the front. I spoke to TB, and after we chewed it over, we agreed to go for it. TB felt it could be the last thing needed to swing the Sun round. So pausing there, is that accurate or not?
Yeah, that's accurate.
We agreed it was important not to change in any sense the policy, but in tone to allow them to put over the message that TB was not some kind of caricature Euro fanatic. So did you feel it was more a sense of rhetoric and tone than substance, or do you feel that the distinction between those two is sometimes a little bit difficult to see?
No, I think in this instance it was very much on that basis. And that's why I talk about the difference between managing them and conceding on policy. I didn't concede on policy at all. Right? So I remained throughout my time as Prime Minister pro-European. And, the fact is, we had a commitment for a referendum if we went, I think it was for the single currency, was it a referendum on the single currency was part of our 5 pledges. And it was important also, by the way, to counter the fact that people thought that, you might be just for some sort of European superstate and so on, which isn't my position. So this allowed us, it's we were choosing the rhetoric carefully, but the substance, no, we didn't change the substance of the policy. And I think in this instance, by the way, I think the distinction between the two is pretty clear.
I think Mr. Campbell told us that the commitment to referendum on the euro was not part of the 5 pledges, but I think it was nonetheless Labour Party policy at this stage. But we can check his evidence on that.
I thought it was part of the 5, but anyway. Okay, we should check it.
Excuse me, this man should be arrested for
Excuse
war
me,
crimes.
excuse
JP
me.
Morgan paid him off for the Iraq
Excuse me.
war. 3 months after we invaded Iraq, they held up the Iraq bank for $20 billion. He was then paid $6 million every year and still is from JP Morgan 6 months after he left office. The man is a war criminal.
Well, I'm sorry for that, Mr. Blair, and I'd like to find out how this gentleman managed to access the court through what is supposed to be a secure corridor. And I'll have an investigation undertaken about that immediately. I apologise.
That's fine. Can I just say, actually, on the record, what he said about Iraq and JP Morgan is completely and totally untrue. I've never had a discussion with them about that or any relationship between them
You
and Iraq.
should not feel... You're entitled to say what you want.
Yeah.
But you should not feel it necessary to answer somebody else's points.
No, I appreciate that, but what part of the difficulty actually with modern politics, and I'd say this not as a criticism of the media, is that my experience of the reporting of these events is that you can have 1,000 people in a room and someone gets up and shouts or throws something, that's the news. The other 999 might as well not have bothered turning up. But anyway, we were back in...
We're back in March 1997.
Right.
The line in the diaries, though, Mr. Blair, it was fantastically irritating on one level that we had to go through these kinds of routines. But in an election looming, we'd be daft not to try it. I mean, was part of the irritation a sense that you were having to tack perhaps a little bit too close to the wind in a way in which you would not otherwise have been minded to do?
Throughout you will find references to a level of discomfort or, feeling uncomfortable about the fact that you had to make this persuasion a big part of what you were doing. But no, I think we were on the right side of the line. This was something where, on many areas of policy, you might have an issue with particular papers and particular ways. What I was always anxious to do, and by the way, towards the end, even more so than at the beginning, was to make sure that what we did was steer the right side of that line and never yield on the policy. So, obviously, there'd be others to judge on this, but I was very careful all the way through. I was not going to change policy because of this media power, but I did have to manage them.
There's some evidence that after the election you wrote a personal note to Mr. Higgins, who of course was then editor of The Sun, saying, I quote, you really did make a difference. Do you remember doing that, Mr. Blair?
I don't specifically, but it's perfectly possible I did. Frankly, it did make a difference.
What, you feel it impacted on the scale of your majority, or what?
I mean, look, it's... Again, I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with this. I thought it made a difference that the Financial Times supported us. What was one of my things that I was trying to do? I was trying to move Labour to a position where it said, we are not going to give any special favours to trade unions. We're a pro-business party as well as supporting individual rights for workers. When the Financial Times, I think in '92 they didn't support the Labour Party, or maybe they did. I can't remember. Anyway, for me, it was important to get them on board. So, again, in that way, I don't think there's anything wrong in that or surprising. If a major newspaper comes on side with you, particularly one that's been very hostile, it's going to make a difference. I don't think there's anything wrong in that, per se.
Well, the support of the Financial Times, although no doubt important as a matter of perception, is unlikely to impact at all on anybody's voting habits, to put it bluntly. But weren't you saying in relation to the Sun, it made a difference because it might have impacted on the way they voted?
Of course. I mean, I think their support, it's hard to quantify this, but I mean, yeah, of course, their support would make a difference. Actually, one of my constant strategic discussions with my folk was, I actually think it did make a difference to us with voters, that business was a significant part of business was on side. I mean, I was the first Labour leader to be able to go to a launch of a manifesto and have a whole lot of business people sitting alongside us. And I still believe, for people on my side of the political fence, that if you don't have substantial business support, it's hard to win the economic argument. So I think these things actually do have an impact. But anyway, that's my business, not yours.
Okay, now I've been asked to put you some questions in relation to the issue of union reform. We saw that hinted at in one of the extracts I'd recently drawn to your attention. And the questions are these. Did you reach an understanding with Rupert Murdoch after you became leader of the Labour Party, but before you became Prime Minister, that he would not repeal, that's you would not repeal, the constraints imposed on trade unions by the various Trade Unions Acts and associated legislation passed in the Thatcher era? And the quid pro quo, I suppose, is that his papers would endorse your election.
No, this was a position I took because I believed in it, and actually it was completely consistent with the positions I'd taken when I was employment spokesman of the Labour Party.
So I put to Mr. Murdoch a piece in the Times, I think it was the 31st of March 1997, which indicated your position, but cause and effect here is completely dissociated. Is that it?
Yeah, because my view was one of the essential things Labour had to do was it had to, we were dogged throughout the 83, 87, 1992 elections with a position that said we were going to repeal all this Conservative legislation, which I thought was not simply foolish politically for us. I thought it was wrong. I mean, I went through all those campaigns, and in the end, I thought the closed shop, for example, was wrong as a matter of principle. I mean, I still do. So I didn't need Rupert Murdoch or anyone else to tell me about that. Now, it's true that had we had a different position, then I think that would have been a big problem with their newspapers, but we didn't take the position for that reason. It was a position I believed in. It was, for me, a very, very important part of New Labour.
And the subsidiary question I've been asked to put, was it not part of this agreement that whilst you insisted that a statutory recognition procedure should be introduced, he insisted, that's Mr. Murdoch, that there should be a clause within it which specifically enabled the existence of a non-independent staff association like NISA to block an application for recognition by an independent trade union at a News International title?
No, so this was, look, I understand why these sort of conspiracy theories arise, but I mean, it's not as if my position on unions and so on was a matter of great surprise. It was actually, for me, a very, very strong article of belief. I think trade unions are a very important part of a modern democratic society, but, it's interesting, actually, that their argument through the 60s and the 70s, and I grew up with this argument, was that they should not be subject to legal constraint. That this was an interference with the democratic principles of trade unionism. And as time went on, I just came to the view that you couldn't argue that. They had power, they should be subject to some form of legal framework. So, this was, my view of this was because I genuinely believe these positions for the Labour Party should change and had to change.
Because Lord Mandelson in his evidence drew a neat analogy between what he described powers of the unions of old and the modern power of the press. Do you see that as a neat analogy or as a mismatch?
I think, some of the arguments are a little, to me, somewhat the same in the sense that I remember at the time people used to argue within the trade union movement that just this whole concept that someone else could tell them, here are certain standards, was wrong. So I suppose there is certain reflection of that, but I think you can take that analogy too far quite quickly.
Okay. Now move on to the Proddy intervention, if I can so describe it, in 1998. We've received already quite a lot of evidence about that. Can I throw into the melting pot another extract from Mr. Mullin's diary, which is page 17 of our bundle?
Yep.
And we're now in March 1998. You see the second paragraph there. Murdoch came up again at the parliamentary committee. The papers are full of stories alleging that the man, that's you of course, has been ringing up the Italian Prime Minister on Murdoch's behalf. I asked, one, who initiated the call to Proddy, and two, what is our relationship with Murdoch? The man was visibly irritated. I don't reveal the details of private conversations, he said testily. I replied, I just wanted to know who initiated it. He seemed to say it was Proddy, adding, the story in today's Telegraph is a load of balls. Then he relaxed and said, my relationship with Murdoch is no different from that with any other newspaper proprietor. I love them all equally. He said forcefully, I've never discussed media
Touch
policy.
of irony, I'd just like to emphasise in that one.
I'm not sure I certainly detected the irony, but whether I delivered it in quite the right tone, probably not in my desire to maintain impartiality throughout. But in terms of the gist of your conversation with Mr. Mullin, is this a fair account or not?
Yeah, again, I can't honestly remember this, but it probably sounds to me about right. And as I think I say in my statement, the call was initiated from Romano Prodi, and basically I raised the issue of whether the idea of having someone from the outside come and own part of Mediaset would be resented or not. He gave me an answer, and I can't remember how this was relayed back, but I'm sure it was. But my point about that is, I would have done that for anyone with substantial British interests. I would have done that if, another media group had asked me to do it.
Okay, Mr. Campbell's account, his diary entry of the 1st of April 1998, page 19, the end of the first paragraph for that date. The TB said he didn't fear them coming at him about me, but about the relationship with Murdoch, and he didn't fancy a sustained set of questions about whether Murdoch lobbied him. Again, is that an accurate account by Mr. Campbell of your then state of mind?
Yeah, because what you knew is indeed turned out to be the case, is that what was a intervention which I think was perfectly justified, that lasted about 2 minutes, ended up occupying days and weeks of time.
So is this your point, that this is an example of a conspiracy theory which really has developed like Turvey, or out of a story which had no validities?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, when you actually come to how we decided media policy, now it's correct that what we decided not to do was to do a big media, regulation and so on, but in respect of the specific issues that came up along the way, we decided, as I say, I think more of them against than in favour. And I say that in my statement. And I wasn't saying whether it was a good idea he bought Mediaset or not. All I was doing was finding out whether a foreign owner would be welcome or not welcome.
And the answer, I think, was not welcome, and Mr. Murdoch didn't press the matter at that point. Is that it?
So I don't think that's unreasonable for that to be asked, or it's and as I say, if another media group had been interested in a possible acquisition, I would have done the same.
I deal with perhaps an issue of more substance, the Human Rights Act, Mr. Blair, which was one, I suppose, of the certainly the most significant achievements of your first term, and one to which you'd been committed in opposition for some significant period of time, and so therefore a lot of time was devoted to it. I mean, was it the position that News International, I suppose together with everybody else, were lobbying for complete press immunity from the Human Rights Act?
Yes, that's right. They wanted no suggestion that you would move outside the bounds of the PCC and self-regulation.
And were you generally supportive of that position?
Yes, that was, I mean, my view is that if you were to deal with this, you had to deal with it head on, as it were, not through the Human Rights Act, which would be a sort of side way of dealing with it. Also, we were, at that time, I think I'm right in saying it was Lord Wakeham who was head of the PCC, who was someone actually I thought was doing quite a good job of that. And the PCC were pretty fierce on this on behalf of the whole of the media, really, not any one particular part of it.
Was the position reached that following, if I can put it in these terms, pressure from Lord Irvine, of course then your Lord Chancellor, who I think was responsible for piloting the Act through Parliament generally, certainly of course through the Lords, that he persuaded you that your position was incorrect, and we ended up with a compromise which we see in the form of Section 12 of the Act?
That's right.
In terms, though, of what your position was, what was the problem in allowing a privacy law to develop incrementally through Article 8, which is what would have happened, indeed has happened in any event, with the introduction of the Act in the form in which we now see it?
Well, as I say, look, I felt we should still be with the self-regulation argument. And I knew that we were going to have quite a big battle over it if we changed that position. In the end, we did come to a compromise, and I think that compromise was perfectly sensible, by the way. But at that time, when were we there? 1998? Would have been. I mean, we'd taken a position in favour of self-regulation. That was the position. But I felt, Derry was making very strong arguments about this. I felt very strongly about it, and had I absolutely felt very strongly about my position, I would have not wanted the compromise. But in the end, I thought, I listened to it and thought, well, this is a way through this.
Although the development of a privacy law through the gateway of Article 8 would be entirely consistent with self-regulation, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's not what they felt at the time. I mean, my recollection of this was that the PCC itself was really the lobbying organ on this one.
What do you think about that? I mean, you may be right, but what do you think about the idea that the PCC is actually acting as a lobby rather than doing the job which might have been thought that it should be doing in the light of Calcutt, which is to provide a mechanism of redress?
That's a good point. I suppose, look, they felt, they were defending their own position as the custodians of press standards. But yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a perfectly reasonable point.
Your original position, in line with the press position, which would have placed the press, as it were, outside the Human Rights Act, would certainly have removed all the force of Article 8 and arguably would have given force to the common law position, which is reflected in Article 10. But why was there a policy issue here? Surely the position, particularly after Princess Diana's death and everything which existed at that stage, was it was appropriate to have a system whereby Article 8 and Article 10 would be balanced and the privacy law would develop in that way, which is what has occurred.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, that was the point that Derry made very strongly and in the end prevailed. The alternative argument was a more political argument. It was that, you know, after events surrounding Princess Diana's death, there was actually a tougher attitude then taken, I think, by the PCC for a time and so on. I think people felt that Lord Wakeham was a more credible chairman of the PCC and all of that. But, you know, it was a political question. I'm not sure either. Frankly, I devoted a vast amount of time to this one. But, no, the point you make is a perfectly reasonable one. And probably if this thing had cropped up in 2006, not 1998, I would have, you know, gone along with the original compromise at the beginning.
Okay. I'll move forward in time, Mr. Blair. We're now in 2001, and your second election victory. Mr. Campbell's diaries again, page 20. It's the bottom of page 21. 30th of October, so this must be the year 2000. The bottom of the page, TB saw Murdoch and Owen Stelzer, and then in brackets Murdoch advisor. He had asked them outright whether they were going to back us. Murdoch said the Tories were unelectable, and that was that. TB seemed to take it at face value. Again, is this an accurate account or not?
Yes, I think that would be an accurate account.
So we do have you asking a direct and explicit question of Mr. Murdoch and getting a blunt answer, don't we?
Yes, I mean, he wouldn't, you know, I don't think it was, you know, with other media people, I would probably have also asked them what their attitude was going to be. Again, I don't see any, you know, they're going to make a decision about it. So why not ask them?
Was this the only occasion in which you were so outright, to use Mr. Campbell's phrase, with Mr. Murdoch, or do you think there were others?
No, I think probably before the 2005 election I would have asked. I don't actually recall that as well as I recall this, partly because there's, you know, Alistair's diary brings it all back, as it were. But I've no doubt I would have, in effect, even if I didn't full on, I would have wanted to know what the situation is. But as I say, I don't think that's, you know, I think I would have done that with any major group that I thought where there was a possibility of securing support.
Well, obviously, for many newspaper groups, there's no point asking the question because you know what the answer's going to be. But it's
right.
just in the cases where there might be some doubt. That
yeah,
you feel
I can't recall ever doing this specifically with other groups. But you know, there was a possibility. For example, the Guardian might have backed the Liberal Democrats, or as I say, the Financial Times might have backed someone else. I can't recall the precise conversations I had, but I don't think there's anything wrong with asking them, you know, whether they're going to support you or not. What's obviously different as if, you know, you're conditioning that in some way.
Okay, now Mr. Campbell gave evidence that over the period 2002-2003, this is tab 3 of the big file, Mr. Blair. He gave his evidence on this point on the 14th of May, and it's page 36 of the transcript.
Right. 36.
Yes, I'm afraid there are two transcripts under tab 3. The one for the 14th of May is the one I'm trying to invite to your attention.
Yep.
That he's suggesting that in about 2002 there was started to be internal discussions about putting the PCC on a statutory basis, creating a right of reply, etc. I mean, first of all, is he right about that?
Yes, there was a big debate going on with the people around me, some of whom felt very strongly. Jonathan was one, Alistair was another, that we should take this issue on. I mean, I was reluctant for the reasons I give. So, I mean, he says here, that I think you've gone to you're quoting from Jonathan, I think, Jonathan Powell, aren't you?
I am, yes.
Yeah. I mean, I remember that discussion taking place, and I think some work was done on it. But I mean, look, this never got to the stage where I was anywhere near taking a different decision to the one I'd taken up to then.
I suppose you reached the point in this was your second term, some would say you were at the zenith of your power, really. Of course, the situation may or may not have changed later. It was the opportunity, insofar as there ever was one. Is that fair?
Yes, I mean, look, some people say you could have done it straight after 1997. You just won this landslide victory, that would have been a chance. But some people would say, well, after everything that happened after the death of Princess Diana, that would have been a chance. There are some people who say, right after the 2001 election, you won a big majority. That would have been the chance. The decision I took, rightly or wrongly, as I say, was there was never going to be a moment when this was not going to have to squeeze out the rest of the government agenda. And, you know, however supportive they seemed or however powerful I seemed, this was going to flip like that the moment you put such an issue centre stage. And look, you see the degree of focus on this inquiry now. So, you know, if you'd been the government of the day and said, I'm going to legislate on this and royal commissions and all the rest of it, I think it would have been anyway, that's the decision I took. You know, I had we were by then in my second term, you know, really starting to move forward on reform in public services. So academy schools were being introduced, and, you know, competition within the health service. We were really getting things changed and done. We had major law and order legislation. Later we had legislation on terrorism and so on. I never felt that I could risk putting all of that to one side to fight this. Now, that's the political judgment, in a way, that you have to make. So some people would say to me, and some of them did say, look, you can do this along with everything else. And I used to say to them, you're being completely unrealistic about this. You take this issue on as Prime Minister, and you're the Prime Minister. You're the person that they think they're holding to account. So in a way, in some ways, you're the worst person to initiate this debate, because they say you're party pre. You know, you want to control us and put us into a straitjacket. So I never felt that I could take a different strategic decision. Okay. And I think, as I say, it's only because of this and because of what has happened that you're in a position where a Prime Minister could and indeed should.
But Mr. Cameron may say it's rather easy for you of the other party to say, now is the time for the Prime Minister to grasp the nettle, but I've become rather depressed as I've listened to you. Do you think it's different now?
Yes, I think it is, actually. I mean, I think what has happened, you know, this is what sometimes happens in life, never mind politics, is that something people have known needs to be sorted out. Suddenly the circumstances become such that people say, right, it's got to be sorted out. Now, I think what you do about it is very difficult. I don't think it's so difficult in relation to these, you know, appalling abuses and so on. I think what's the political aspect of this is quite difficult for reasons we can go into. But I think you can get a political consensus today and keep it. So, and I think there's a lot of responsibility on the rest of us, by the way, if the Prime Minister is now faced with decisions arising out of your report. It's really important people don't play politics with that. Because my anxiety, you see, there was never anything of this nature that came up in this way. My anxiety, frankly, about the strategic risks of going down this path was I could see a situation where your opposition would immediately be going to the media and saying, well, I don't know why he's doing this. Even people within your own party, even people within your own cabinet would be saying, he's gone crazy now, he's trying to take on. Yeah. My actual view was it was not possible. Now, I do think, though, what is very unfair would be to leave this Prime Minister, you know, I'm trying to to work out how, if I were him, I would deal with it. And I think if there are reasonable recommendations that come out, we can come on to some things that those might be. I think it's very important that he is not left in a position where he's politically exposed on this, because that is not fair to him, because we shouldn't be under no doubt at all this is still going to be extremely difficult. But actually, no, on balance, I think it can be done and it should be done now.
Right.
2003 now, Mr. Blair, the Communications Act took some time to pass through Parliament. It's an act of some complexity, and Tessa Jowell told us all about it. She also said in her evidence, this is under tab 6, that within a couple of days of being appointed, this was one of the pressing issues, and then she saw you, had a conversation which was, she said, I think necessary, and she asked you directly whether or not any deal had been done with Rupert Murdoch on the reform of the cross-media ownership rules, and he gave me an absolute assurance, which I completely accepted, that there had been no prior agreement. So, first of all, is her evidence accurate on that point?
Yes, that's correct.
Were you surprised that she asked you that question?
Not particularly. I mean, we're talking 2002, are we, roundabout? Yeah, but by then, this issue to do with me and Rupert Murdoch and so on. So it didn't surprise me that she asked that question.
In terms of the substance of the matter, though, do you feel that the Communications Act reflected in any way an implied deal with Mr. Murdoch or not?
No, absolutely not. I mean, for a start, the thing that we did, which is boost Ofcom, was a thing he absolutely disliked. And, contrary to what's often written about this, I mean, Channel 5 was not his... I mean, I never thought he was behalf of Channel 5. Channel 3 would have been a far better fit for him, and that he was unable to do. I mean, my thing within this Communications Act, because I did talk to the ministers about it several times, my thing was very much to do with trying to open up the media ownership thing. I mean, this issue to do with media ownership, I mean, I have a view on this that is different from many people who worry about media power. And, there are two elements of this. Sometimes people worry about concentration of media ownership. Sometimes people worry about foreign owners coming into the British media space. I thought the first was always best dealt with as a competition issue. And I thought the second, I just disagreed with people that if you said, okay, to any foreign owner, you've got to now put all the media in British hands, I wasn't ever sure that was going to produce a different situation. And I actually remember during the course of this piece of legislation, I actually wanted to see if there were major media companies, I mean, people, the Time Warners of this world, the Viacom, I think there were, Axel Springer, other big organizations that if you had a more open media policy would be prepared to come in. Because what concerned me always was that you needed, it wasn't necessary just to have other media owners, it was necessary to have other media owners with heft, with the ability to put major investment in, and frankly with the type of global media position that I could see the world moving to. So I didn't have any, I mean, some people took a different view from me. I mean, I had no belief that if you turn bits of the media over to British as opposed to foreign owners, you were going to necessarily get a fairer crack at the whip.
Okay. The last point is the 2004 referendum on the European Constitution. We've covered, of course, with Mr. Straw and with Lord Mandelson, but position from their evidence is really that had nothing much to do with the position of the Murdoch press. Is that right or not?
Yeah, again, it wasn't, by the way, the Murdoch press's position. It was, I think, a majority of the media would have been in favour of a referendum on the Constitution. I didn't want to do it, by the way. But as I think I say in my statement, Jack Straw in the end wrote me a memo saying it's going to happen. So do you want it to happen to you, or do you want to take the initiative? And his advice very strongly, and I thought rightly in the end, was to take the initiative.
Okay. Now, I'm sure you'd want to express attention, Mr. Blair, to 05575 under the rubric particular questions, where you collect together 6 examples where the government turned down the positions, as you say, of the Murdoch media. You start off with the Man U bid, then BBC, new channels, the increase in the licence fee, greater powers to Ofcom, ITV, and listed events for sport. And you say that's clear evidence of the absence of any sort of express deal.
Yeah, I mean, we were, I feel on very, very strong ground on this when it came, as opposed to the more general issue to do with the media and regulation and so on, when it came to the specifics, I think it's very, very clear in the 2003 Communications Act as an example of that. And, the strongest lobbying I remember getting from media organisations during my time was actually the BBC over the licence fee. And by the way, we supported, and I continue to think, that a strong BBC is a very important part of our democracy, even though, obviously, particularly over Iraq, we had a severe falling out with them. But I mean, none of these things were things they liked or wanted. So, and that's why I don't, I think, although the commercial interests of these organisations are obviously always important, I do say in my statement, I think looking at their influence solely through that paradigm, I think is a mistake.
Can I put to you a contra-view for Mr. Price, which is under tab 42? I don't think this is in the context of express deal, but it might be of implied deal. This is in the second file I think we've prepared for you. It's a PC rate in The Guardian on the 1st of July 2006, headed "Rupert Murdoch is effectively a member of Blair's cabinet." First of all, can we be clear? Mr. Price worked for you, I think, from 1998 to 2000 and not sure exactly when, but can you help us?
Yeah, I think Lance Price was first of all, a Labour Party press officer, then he came in to Downing Street for a time at least.
So for about how many years he was there, can you help?
I can't, but I can find out exactly.
And he says in the 4th paragraph, beginning "in my spin doctoring days," do you have that one?
Yeah.
In the second sentence, "It's true that Rupert Murdoch doesn't leave a paper trail that could ever prove his influence over policy, but the trail of politicians beating their way to him and his papers tells a different story." I think he's asking one there to draw reasonable and sensible inferences from conduct. Would you agree?
Yeah, he is, but I noticed that he, there isn't, I don't know a policy that we changed as a result of Rupert Murdoch. By that, am I saying he's not a powerful figure in the media world? No, of course he is. And of course you're aware of what his views are. And that's why I say part of my job was to manage this situation so that you didn't get into a situation where you were shifting policy. And on Europe, which is the only example he gives, I would say very strongly we maintained the position that I believed in Europe. And that was the position the Sun and the News of the World frequently disagreed with me on. I remember that headline they did once, I think I was the most dangerous man in the world or something. So it's to misdescribe the issue, actually.
And he says a bit later down, I've never met Mr. Murdoch, but at times when I worked at Downing Street, he seemed like the 24th member of the cabinet. His voice was rarely heard, but then the same could have been said of many of the other 23. But his presence was always felt. Well, what do you make of that?
Also in respect of policy, by the way, I should say the whole, if you look at the policies that Rupert Murdoch or indeed anybody else was concerned about, they fit into certain categories. I mean, Europe was obviously, that was probably the major thing he and I used to row about, actually, and debate. But sometimes what people wouldn't accept from a Labour Party perspective was in things like public service reform or trade union reform, for example. Our views may have coincided, but I believed in what I was doing. I didn't need him or anyone else to tell me what to do. So I think this is, like it's...
And he says, when he submitted his book, The Spin Doctor's Diary, to the Cabinet Office, your staff were deeply unhappy. No fewer than a third of their objections related to one man, not Tony Blair or even Gordon Brown, as might have been expected, but Rupert Murdoch. Do you remember that?
I don't, frankly. Actually, by the way, it says apparently he was here from 1998 to 2001, I see down at the bottom.
Thank you. And the final point, in my first few weeks as Alistair Campbell's deputy, so that's in 1998, I was told by somebody who would know that we'd assured Mr. Murdoch we wouldn't change policy on Europe without talking to him first. Was that assurance given?
No, we were never given an assurance to Murdoch or anybody else that we were not going to change policy without seeking some sort of permission. That's absurd. However, having said that, I mean, if we were about to engage in a major change of policy on an issue that mattered to any particular media group, we would probably have tried to prepare the way for it. But I mean, that, again, I think is perfectly sensible and there's nothing wrong with that. You see, the thing that's important to realise about this is, of course you were aware that he and indeed other papers had very strong stances on issues. Right. And again, I think it's important that this is not simply located with the Murdoch media and nobody else. So we realised the Guardian would have very strong issues on certain things, and the Mirror, for example, and obviously the Mail Group and so on, Telegraph. And would we interact with them in order to try and, if we thought they might be opposed, soften that opposition, say, look, I think you should be aware of X, Y, and Z, so that when you're writing about this, you should realise this is our argument, and so on. Of course we would. And I don't think, A, you're ever going to stop that, and even if you don't do it from the official organs of government, if you're a cabinet minister about to take through a difficult piece of legislation, you're going to speak to many, many media outlets to try and get your point of view across. And that won't just be by formal interviews. You'll be briefing them. You'll have in the main political correspondence, and you'll say, look, this is what I'm trying to do. This is why I'm trying to do it. I think it would be, I just think that, A, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's a perfectly healthy interaction with the media. And B, I think it's absolutely inevitable. That is a completely different thing from saying, you've got a veto over policy. And by the way, the most obvious case I gave you earlier is the EU rebate, when there were vitriolic editorials written about my position on a whole series of things to do with that. And we did the budget deal with literally not, I doubt we got any part of the media on board for that. And that was a big deal. And we did it irrespective of what the Murdoch media or anybody else said, because I thought it was the right thing to do for the country.
All right, that's probably a convenient moment. We'll resume at 2 o'clock, if that's all right, Mr. Blair. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
All rise.